So as Peter's already said, I'm going to take you through a little bit of information around how I've been using the ABACUS API to get more data in automatically and to build some more trust. Before we get started, there's a small important information slide just to go through, as I'm sure you can appreciate with MAN being a regulated entity, we have to provide this information as part of our presentations. So with that bit complete, here's the agenda for this afternoon session. I'd like to give you a little bit of background about MAN Group, just for those of you that aren't aware. Explain some of the background and the problem and the issues that I've observed in several scenarios. Discuss why an API might be helpful in this sort of situation. And also in our context, I'm going to mention cloud integration platforms. Many of you are probably familiar with APIs for on-premises systems or individual cloud systems, but the concept of having an integration service that runs in the cloud for you is probably more of a more recent trend, but something that fits quite well, certainly with our architecture that we've deployed here. I've got some examples and some results, including some screenshots. Unfortunately, there are no live demos, but I think everyone appreciates live demos are always an extra risk factor. I can show you some results that we see and share some ideas of what we're planning to do next with the API. As Peter has mentioned, please do put your questions in the Q&A box as we go through, and there is some time for those at the end. So for those of you who don't know MAN Group, we were founded in 1783. It's a very, very long time ago, but the company has undergone quite a bit of change over that time. As I said, we're an active investment management firm. We have a global presence. Our headquarters are in London, but we do genuinely have offices all over the world. And over time, these various companies have come together to form MAN Group, which means that they all have a very different personality in terms of how they do their investments. This has, as you'd expect, led to some acquisitions that mean lots of different systems. We're working to do some sort of consolidation, and this is where the value of getting the information across all of those businesses, across all of their systems to present in a standard way becomes really useful for us in enterprise architecture. I'd say as well, we are incredibly agile to change. The COVID-19 situation has obviously forced a lot of technology and culture change into organizations around the world. And if you want to find out more about our culture, if you go to man.com/technology, there's some interesting articles there around how we've coped with this, what we're doing next, and just our overall approach to technology. The one thing I will say is MAN is an incredibly technology-focused firm. It powers everything across our business. And just to give you a little bit of context with our relationship with Avolution, as I said before, it was May 2019 when we got our kind of ABACUS instance available. That also happened to be the month that I joined MAN Group. So quite an exciting time to come into a new company, which is just putting in an enterprise architecture tool. In June 2019, we took the Rapid Start workshop from Avolution. This is a very good kind of 2-3 day introduction to the platform that allowed us to see just the power and the confidence that we could get in the tool and to start building our meta model. By September of that year, we had our kind of initial meta model complete, and we loaded in some reference data, knowing right from the start that one of the things we wanted to do was start to map applications back to cost centers. We soon realized though this was going to be a bit of a challenge to maintain because cost centers, as with other data, will invariably change over time. Then, as we've already heard, in November last year, James presented the equivalent of this event around how we do our application rating and categorization using the algorithms feature that's in ABACUS. This is where it became even more important about having some of that reference data up to date. MAN had been looking for an integration platform as a service for a while as part of our journey to cloud for some of our commodity systems. That became available in April 2020. And almost the first thing that we connected up to that platform was the ABACUS API. As of June this year, we now have a number of integrations into the ABACUS API that are running in our production environment. This maybe shows how easy some of these services are to use when you have an integration platform as a service that is doing most of its work through click, not code. And then we've got to July for today, which is, I'm delighted to be here to give you a presentation of what we've done. Just to give you that extra bit of context, this is our current meta model. What you'll notice is a lot of the work we do is focused around the application and the components that sit beneath it. We have a number of connections out to suppliers, but also out to cost centers so we can establish ownership within the business. We are also building connections to projects. And then from James's talk last year, you may have remembered around the risky activities and the data classifications that we have. We start to bring those in to the application components as well. So a lot of the work focuses on the application. That's not to say we can't add more data to enrich it underneath around maybe the infrastructure the application is running on. Is it in a cloud service? Is it in our own data centers? Some of the problems that I've observed in the past, we know that enterprise architecture is there to provide that value back to the business stakeholders. And that means you have to talk in business terms back to them. They don't necessarily want to hear lots of technology detail. The challenge with that is most of the data that we need is owned by other parts of the business in other tools. You think of cost centers, you think of suppliers, you think of project details, they're generally managed somewhere else. And to get that across is a bit of a challenge when it's regularly changing. We also found that sometimes information is not recorded in the same way. So if you ask 3 people what their definition of criticality is, you would probably get 3 different answers. So by having something that's standardized and centralized and written in the same way allows us to bring that information in, and then we know we're explaining it on a level playing field. Probably the biggest challenge though is a lot of this information collection and update requires some humans to go and do it, whether that's an export from one system, an import into another system. You've got to keep remembering to do that, and it can be easy to get out of sync with that. There's also, I think, a rise of what people are knowing as infrastructure as code or service as code. You know, I think gone are the days, or certainly drastically reduced, of large waterfall projects where you would spend months planning a design, knowing exactly how many servers you're going to build, at what spec, put all that in your CMDB. Today, you can go to your cloud service provider of choice. Within a matter of minutes, you've got a database, you've got some application servers, you've got network load balancers, all sorts of components just sprung up in real time. So how do you capture that information to keep the EA world relevant? I mean, let's not forget the classic stuff that will change. Cost centers will move, departments will move, they'll get renamed, new ones will be created, or indeed you go and acquire a whole new firm. All that has to get rolled into the changes so that EA data is regarded as trusted and up to date. So why use an API for this? The best advantage around an API is it gives you that automated data flow between systems. It allows you to interact with an application without the need for a user interface, which is great for systems that will sit there and just churn out on a schedule or on a real time. Certainly with the rise of cloud services, we are seeing more drive to real-time triggers for events. It's now no longer a scheduled export at 2 a.m. on a Sunday. It's as soon as a data field changes or a new record is created, I need to know about it. An API also allows us to extract out just the values that we need. Quite often, EA needs mostly the high level information. Whilst the information about a particular server's configuration or its rack location or free space, all that sort of stuff is useful, it's not necessarily the thing that goes to the top of an EA dashboard. We care more about the operating system that's running on. Is it in a cloud provider? Is it in a data center? Where do we need to get that balance right? And if you suddenly get a huge export of a lot of data, you end up cutting down most of that. We're also very keen that data ownership and accuracy remains with the owner of that team. So when we need to find out information potentially about our virtualization platform, we ask the virtualization team. When you want information about the cost centers, you ask the HR team that maintain that in the tool. It promotes that single source of truth, but allows multiple views to be built. And more importantly for EA, it allows those views to be connected together with the right data. It also allows those views to be created for each of the stakeholders with different concerns or different outlooks. Again, if you just send somebody a cost center report and then you send them a list of applications, or there's a name of them together, it maybe isn't as useful as if you can build a dashboard through Enterprise that gives them a clickable map of the cost center hierarchy with the links into the applications. Straight away, you've got a more valuable view for them there. So I mentioned at the start, cloud integration platforms or integration platform as a service. Certainly at Man Group, there is a drive to move our commodity services into the cloud. These are things like IT support tickets, HR systems, communication tools, which I think certainly many of us recently have grown up using a lot of WebEx, Slack, Teams, Zoom, whatever it is technology that you have for meetings. More of the work is heading that way. There is an interesting side point that if you have a look on the internet, you'll find there's been a recent article from Slack about how Man moved all of their people to Slack in about a week or two. And this was a direct response to the COVID-19 situation. And we are seeing great adoption with that. There is now more and more work done inside Slack. It's moving away from emails, it's moving away from spreadsheets, but that starts to leave some things behind. We also know that out-of-the-box connectors for these SaaS services don't always provide a full feature set, or sometimes they may need a component deploying inside your network for it to be fully functioning. Now, with that, if you have to do that for each of the components that you have SaaS services for, you're increasing your complexity, you're increasing more services that are needed to be run. With a cloud integration platform, you don't have that probability. You provide one point that is available for all the integrations to flow through. An interesting point as well is that every product's API is different. So we have teams that specialize in certain applications that obviously know their APIs inside out. But if you ask them to come and help us or come and use the ABACUS API, they have to go back almost to the start and learn the syntax, learn how it processes responses, learn how to interact with it. The integration platform takes away some of that learning curve by allowing us as the EA team to present recipes for ABACUS without people having to know exactly what ABACUS does. It means we get their information in, they can also start to query some of our information without having to know lots of individual commands. And my last point here is, which I think has been interestingly tested out recently with the surge in remote working. If we had to do our integrations through an on-premises system, or there's some other work that goes through your end device, that today is typically not in the office now, it's at the end of a VPN or some other remote connection. Even if you were in the office and you're making a call out to Slack or your chat platform, that's going out to the internet, it then has to come back in and go out somewhere else. If you can pass all that through a cloud platform, you're shortening the time between the two systems. And in some cases, they may even run in the same facility. So the slightly more exciting part of the talk that isn't just some slides, this is some real screenshots. We all know that ABACUS has huge scope for customizing the meta model to suit everyone's own organization. And that's great, but sometimes there's a lot of information and a lot of this won't change that often, or it's not as important when it does change. So one of the recipes we're running at the moment is when a project stage changes, so it moves from executing to closing, or indeed if the application score changes, which James talked about last year, we have it set up to send an alert to our Slack channel. Now this does two things. One of them is it tells us when something's changed. You can soon imagine with 500 applications and 100 plus fields per application, this is a lot of things to keep an eye on to see what's changing. It also means actually we only get notified when something that we care about changes. Now, as it's in Slack as well as a message, we can then interact with that in the same way as if it was any other message. So all of a sudden the message says the score for ABACUS has changed. We can ask somebody, do we know about that? Are we expecting that to happen as a result of a project or a design change? Similarly for projects, when new projects are added, and this is obviously the beauty of enterprise, you can push out that data editing and the data management to other people in the organization. But sometimes you want a bit of a heads up when something is new or is changes, particularly for closing out projects. The second example, which is a bit more interactive, is as we have ABACUS as our repository for application information, more and more people are coming to it to get answers to their questions about the application. Now, again, we said the enterprise dashboard screens work very well for this, but sometimes people just want a very quick answer to a couple of standard fields. So as again, I said, a lot of our work is done within Slack already. You're messaging people, you might just want to know, can you just tell me who owns that application? Or when is it okay to restart that particular service? This recipe that I've built with our integration platform that's called Wacato does exactly that. You send it a command, which then comes back and asks for the name of the application. It then sends a lookup to ABACUS to say, go and get the details for that application. And we've added a few kind of key properties. So the most common question usually is, who's the application owner for this app? Interestingly, we've added the app type that we're recording as SaaS in this case, but we also have the ability to add, as I say, some support information. And in a slightly new iteration of this, I've also added the modified time and user from the ABACUS API. So we also now have an instant view of how fresh is that data. If it hasn't been touched for a year, we might start to question, is this still valuable? Is this still the case? And just to prove how simple this is, I will be the first one to admit that my career has not involved building APIs or running development work like this, but with the Workato platform, it makes it incredibly easy to do. So we have a bidirectional connection to Abacus and to Slack. This allows us to have a command come in from Slack, so we could call this. Workato then knows it needs to go and ask Abacus some details. And you can see the steps that I've laid out on the right-hand side around getting an authorization token for the API, go and find the component from the name that's been put in from Slack, and then go and get those additional properties that we want to return to the user at the final step as a nice kind of simple laid out message with some very clear fields so you know. It's also a great indication to see if there's a field missing. So if you wanted to run a check and say, do we have an application owner for everything? If the response comes back and that application owner field is blank, we know we need to go and find that. Some other examples that I talked about at the start around reference data. Obviously, a lot of enterprise architecture practices will talk in terms of the company structure, or indeed some of their suppliers around mapping that relationship to which applications are supplied by this supplier. Where are they in the organization? This data is typically a bit slower to update, but again, we have the problem that we don't necessarily need or want all the fields that a system may have around our supplier and their status, and what currency they're paid in, and all this type of information. What we do care is that the same supplier that we also buy 4 other applications from. We also have the ability there to translate some of that data around into the right fields so that we're pulling in just the information that we need. And then my point that goes back to what I mentioned at the start is we're removing that human effort in keeping things up to date. So we're no longer having to rely on somebody providing us an export from the system that manages our suppliers and then coming to the EA team for us to go and upload that into Abacus. We can push it through the API so that it happens on a schedule basis, and also then have a notification back into Slack when it's completed. Again, we know that maybe nothing works, so or nothing's been updated, sorry, and that's fine. But when something is updated, we can go through and say, yes, no, that's fine, that's all expected. And again, just to show there's the example of how this works in terms of simple steps. This one is a scheduled pull from Workday that maintains some of that information we need. Workato then can process that into Abacus. And the first part we do there as well is check, do we need to update it? Do we already know about this cost center, this supplier, whatever record it is? And then we can use that to send messages back out to Slack. Just to give you a flavor of what we're thinking about next, whilst I've talked about how we've got the API set up and the connections flowing for application information, we're always looking to improve and do things ahead. One of the things we want to look at is then using our integration platform as the way to provide access to the Abacus API. So we don't necessarily want to have people to have to learn and understand the Abacus API in its structure, but we would like them to come and use the data. Because the more people you get using that one central source, the more valuable it becomes, the more trusted it becomes, and the more people use it. They'll soon start to say, make sure that you go and grab the information from Abacus, because that's the place that we trust it's come from. That's the plan to start to pump the connection through there. We also know that we're going to expand to create or to consume some more data from other areas. And what we're looking at here is now we've got 1 or 2 ways in to provide the data through the API, we can more easily expand that to other systems. We've understood some of the logic of how you have to check, does a component exist? Do we need to update some fields? Which ones do we need to pass through? Probably the most exciting plan we have for the future is we, at the moment, do an application recertification every quarter for our most critical applications. And this involves making sure we have information correct about the owners, about what the application can do, and also make sure that they are certified every quarter. Now, at the moment, we're using the Abacus Enterprise dashboards, and we're using the filtered links, which are brilliant, because we can send those to people and say, you need this information, please go and check it, and then certify that it's complete. What we'd look to do is around changing that so that we can send the messages through Slack, probably even have them automated, so almost on a schedule. You can have a message saying, hello, it's now Q3, Mr. Application Owner, you own these 4 applications, please can you come and certify them, and provide that link to them to click in. Maybe even give them the option of showing them what's changed, or is this information correct, and the button in Slack to go through. That's some of the plans that we have in the future around development with the Abacus API. So with that, I've given you a quick run through of some of the challenges we have around keeping the reference data up to date. That's also to how to cope with a very rapidly changing environment and a shift to more of this real-time work, making sure that EA has a way to keep up with that real-time nature and is not perceived as, oh, you know, it's a 5-year roadmap from EA. We want to say, look, it's real-time. Here's our view of what's going on now. How do we start to use that working through more real-time questions and information, and a little bit of plans from the future. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for listening. I can see we've already got some questions coming through, and we'll love to get through some of those now for you.
Adam, thank you very much. That was great. That really was fantastic. So that's good. And yes, you're right. There have been some questions coming in. And indeed, I can see that your colleagues have in part sort of updated people to say that answers can be given. So James, are you with Adam determining who's going to answer which question?
Yes, I can. I'll just read them off in order, to be fair. I don't think they need any preparation or anything. So the first one is from someone called Anonymous Attendee. No, I'm joking. How are you dealing with demand from other people? Do other teams want to put their information in Abacus after seeing the dashboards? And how are you deciding what should or shouldn't be in the tool?
Okay, so brilliant question. We absolutely are seeing more demand from people. As we're able to show more of the dashboards to people, I think the penny almost starts to drop when you say, here's the real-time information. You don't need to email the spreadsheet, or you don't need to have data submitted to somebody else to go and do those check and upload. Now, clearly in Abacus, we still have some kind of validation rules. In quite a few of the fields, we have drop-down boxes, and it's something that James spoke about in his talk last year, where if you want, you know, good data to come in, free text is not the way to do it. And that's kind of far too easy in some kind of offline tools. So we are seeing an uptake in it, and we've even managed to get a few cases where we've seen requests for information go out, and we've gone to that person and said, well, could we get you to use Abacus? Because you're asking the same audience that we're using for application certification. They can just click on the link, go and do this in real time, and you then got an increased reference set around what's going on. In terms of deciding what should or shouldn't be in the tool, this is something that we as an EA team look after and have the discussion. We're very clear with people, it's not a kind of content repository. So any sort of free structured information doesn't really fit in there. We will very happily have a field that includes a link to a wiki page or some other reference documentation, but it typically should be around stuff you can fit in the drop-down box, connections to other parts of the model, or anything that we can put a bit of control around. But we're certainly very open to building that kind of body of knowledge for what we need. And if we do come across other fields, we will always go and ask the relevant team to add them in.
Okay. I'd also like to add to that at the moment, it's more a case of us going to people saying this information would be better suited in Abacus, or would be better off in Abacus. We have had requests where people want to put things in, and generally we're open to anything that we think would add value. Because there's no sort of restriction on the size of it. We just want to make sure that we end up with structured data and not unstructured data, and that they know the responsibility to keep the information up to date is on them, rather than being on us to keep it up to date and curate it. Okay, question 2. Does anyone in the organization have access to the data in Abacus via Wacato? Are there any levels of permission involved?
So I think, as everyone knows, there is an incredibly comprehensive access model built into Abacus. At the moment, all of our recipes are just reading data or providing alerts. So we have restricted those permissions that the Wacato account has. One of the benefits we do have with our integration platform is that if we're using Slack as one of the connectors in, it can authenticate that user. So we have kind of an absolute trail of which user's gone through to modify any record or even request it. But it is something you have to think about when you're providing an API account, because somebody could potentially put in 4 or 5 commands to it. They need to be able to respond to that.
Okay, and I would also like to add on that question, onto the end of that response, that it's very early days for our Workato being our iPaaS solution, and at the moment we are only dealing with things that would happen internally within IT. It's currently on our plan for the next quarter to start delivering, to start inputting things like Chinese walls, so that data doesn't fall into the wrong hands or to the wrong department. But we don't actually have an answer for how we're going to do that yet. We know it's possible, we just haven't done it yet. So question 3, Adam, why did you pick Workato compared to other iPaaS leaders like Dell, Boomi, or Informatica? Was there something about it that made it good for Abacus compared to others?
Okay, so I think with that one, the decision around the tool that we chosen was taken in a different project before I was brought into it. What I think I would say is it wasn't focused just on Abacus. We were looking across the organization, because as you can imagine, I've already mentioned that Man has well over 500 applications in our catalog at the moment. Lots of those require integration in various different states. And one of the capabilities we're looking for is how we can do that as neatly as possible, providing some secure access from our on-premises network, as well as consuming that with cloud connectors. And Workato has a number of built-in services that allow us to very easily go and connect to things like Salesforce and indeed to Slack and other cloud tools. So I think it was a mixture of a number of things, partly around functionality. There's obviously a commercial part of that you appreciate I can't really speak about, but it was a combined evaluation, and there were certainly a number of tools that were considered right up front.
Yeah, if you are in the process of looking for an iPaaS solution, don't overlook Workato because it's smaller. There's buy-in from the likes of ServiceNow, Salesforce, Slack. It's what Slack actually use at their own offices. So it is a very comprehensive platform that's, to us, looked like it was further forward than the likes of Dell or Informatica. But as Adam said, the project to decide which integration platform we were using was actually done quite a while ago. So that all may have changed. So the next question I'm going to read is, how did you initially decide what data source you wanted to connect to? Did you prioritize certain systems for ease or certain systems with critical information?
Again, very, very good question around, where do you start with? And I'm sure James won't mind saying that we had maybe quite a few of these conversations at the start with Abacus about, you've got an amazingly broad EA tool that can have pretty much everything in, but where do you want to start? And actually we had a similar discussion when we started with Workato that says, we have all of this possibility to integrate almost anything to anything, where do you want to go? So we did a bit of a prioritization, certainly for Abacus, around getting that ownership information, to make sure that we have it linked not only maybe just to a person, but to a cost center. This also then helps in the future when we look to suppliers. So to make sure that we have a single record of a supplier where we are required to carry out due diligence on that supplier, we have some checks in process to make sure it's done. It means it also builds the context of our application catalog, and you can suddenly have a view, well, if we buy this product from Microsoft, what else do we buy from Microsoft? So it wasn't necessarily done for ease of implementation, but I certainly think, and this does relate to a question I spotted further down about the data from Workday, is there's a published report that we pick up that has the information that we need in it. So from an integration part, that was fairly easy to go and start with. And because it's reference data, it doesn't really change that frequently. When you move on to maybe some data around which hosts a particular application is running on, this becomes a bit tricky because it's much more real time. It does change at a higher frequency. You have to make sure that you're modeling that in the right way. But we certainly found that, I guess, application ownership and the information about an application was the critical part for us from an Abacus point of view.
Yeah, it's definitely worth checking out the presentation we did last year about where to start with your EA and building out an application catalog. It goes much more in depth about how we decided what we needed before we were even thinking about connecting to data sources. The next question, Adam, is how did you find the Abacus API to work with, considering you mentioned you haven't worked with APIs too much before?
Yeah, so that was kind of I guess one of actually the perks of coming to work at Man, they let you work on a wide variety of projects. And I think if I said to most people that are looking at an architect type job, they would not necessarily be expected to go and deal with APIs and putting code together. I felt it was very easy to get started with. We had some time with one of the consultants from Avolution that sort of guided us through that initial getting started and how to use it. A very good tip of using Postman, which is an application that you can run on your desktop to create those individual commands before you start to put them in a tool like Workato. The risk is with those, because it runs on an automated basis and you can set it obviously to iterate through every one of the 500 applications. If you get something wrong, you're about to see 500 errors. So definitely work with it offline first to start with. There's some very good documentation that is provided on the API. So certainly for people that have Abacus hosted, you'll find all of the information there to go and use. It was really simple to get started with, but I would say definitely have a tool like Postman to go and do that initial development.
Okay, we have a sort of general EA question now. What feedback have you gotten from the business about the work done by the EA team? Have you then changed the way you're doing EA work?
Yeah, so I think this is it's an ongoing discussion and evolution for us at Man. I think there is definitely appreciation for us being able to join up all the information to show that big picture with the context. We've certainly modified some of the ways we work, particularly around our architecture review boards and around the information that goes in Abacus, to make sure we're showing information that's valuable to those stakeholders rather than just what EA want to see.
Okay. Could you please elaborate on the functionality your organization gets from Workday? Oh, you've already covered that, haven't you?
Yeah, I think on that one,
further into that one?
I think really, I'm not a Workday expert by any means at all. All I can, I think, say on that part is we have there's an existing published report on some data. We pick it up as a copy and just take out the fields that we need from it. Because it's purely a one-way, we're just looking at the reference of that information. That's all we need from them at the moment.
Yeah. Okay, so this one's quite interesting. Are you running your Abacus in private cloud Workato environment? I think they mean in a private cloud Workato environment to your secure data center. I guess yes. The answer may surprise you.
Yes, I think just to be very clear, Avolution host our Abacus instance for us, and Workato is run as a service from their cloud provider that they choose. So it's not a private sort of physical instance, but they are, of course, logically separate instances, and we've had all the relevant due diligence done on those suppliers as we needed to.
And I think this is an important point with iPaaS versus traditional sort of integration methods is the information is not coming on premise. It's not going via our data centers. Nothing's sitting in our data center. We have IP whitelist restrictions on any cloud providers we use. So we have to add Workato we have to get Abacus to allow, we have to get Avolution to allow Workato to talk into our instance. And the same with Workday, but we're moving away from the idea that everything has to come on-prem. And that's just as a complete side. That's why we've been able to scale up our WebEx and why we've been able to scale up our Slack so quickly is because we're allowing things to go like for instance, I'm sitting at home now. I'm on a VPN, but my WebEx and my Slack don't go through that VPN because we're moving to a model now where we trust applications to talk to each other securely without having to come via us. And this very much fits into that model. What is the status about data privacy in Abacus?
So I think with that one, again, we'll maybe make the point, we've done the necessary due diligence on the suppliers that are involved for that. We've started with a model that none of the data in Abacus should be secret in any way. It's more about making sure that we have a common record that everyone can contribute to and make sure we have that one accurate source, so we're not having to go, well, is it in this list? Is it in that list? Is it somewhere else? We do have some restrictions around who can change particular fields, just to make sure, again, that there is a little bit of control and we're not having everybody update all the fields all of the time. But certainly say the view is that it's not there to hold sensitive information. That can always be referenced elsewhere onto a wiki or some other document that you would control the permissions a bit more firmly around.
Good answer. Right. For organizations interested in using the Abacus API for the first time, what are the top things they should consider? Where should they start?
Interesting question. I guess my first response is part of that depends on what you're using your Abacus instance for. We took the approach of focusing very much on application information and say on that ownership around it. Certainly the kind of the scheduled polling to see what's changed is very easy to set up. It is also very straightforward to start to create components. So if you're looking to do, say, an import from another system, or you've got a project that's handing off a large number of assets, you could have them all created via the API. That does kind of run very easily, and you can obviously set most of the same things you can do around parents and custom properties. I would certainly say the scheduled ones are probably the easiest to start to look at a simple change of values, but there's no reason why you couldn't have it start creating components and indeed updating components when they go through.
Yeah, I would add to that answer to be careful about how much information you're pumping in. It's very easy to just set up a link between, for instance, ServiceNow and Abacus, but if you're in a situation like us where the ServiceNow information is not ideal, then you can end up with just two messes rather than a single unified data set. So just be very careful about what you choose to collect, and if you're collecting it, have a reason to collect it, because you can end up with a lot of mess, which we've thankfully avoided. I'd like to think so anyway. Right, next. How do you keep data consistent end to end within a real-time context? In other words, if not all data is updated on a real-time basis, it could temporarily be out of sync with other data until that data is also updated, perhaps causing some disconnects in Abacus modeled relationships. Do you schedule periodic updates where they are at a consistent baseline?
Okay, so interesting question again. At the moment, most of the data that we need is coming in on kind of a scheduled import, so we're relatively confident that that's okay. Some of the real-time updates, we haven't gone down to that level yet of starting to bring in when a new server's built, when a new application's deployed, update the Abacus record. That is probably something we're going to start to look at next. I think the thing I'd say about that is Abacus is there as a kind of reference repository. If you're looking to understand which particular instance of an application is deployed on a particular server, the reality is you're going to get the better information from your deployment system. We know, there may be some disconnects around the relationships, but again, I think this comes back to that tidy up, and actually what the API could probably help us with is start to flag where things don't have a connection, or if there's, look at the number of connections on the component. If it's not what we expect, then we can start to flag that and say, can someone go and investigate that situation? Is it that the information hasn't flowed through? Do we need some manual updates for it? There's some potential to think about for that. So great suggestion. Thank you.
Okay, next. How do you handle versioning of models when the data controlling the model relationships is updated on a real-time basis?
So Abacus just does all that for us. We don't have to worry about kind of version control, the commits, what changes. We know that the audit log is capturing all that for us, which is good because it's all there, and we can send, if we need to, we can go in through Studio and have a bit of an explore about a component and work out what was changed at a particular time. Was there something's missing? I think it is obviously one of the really good features, and I think version control generally can be a bit of a nightmare if it's too onerous. We do like the fact that the Abacus platform just deals with that for us.
Yeah, we're not running sort of multiple architectures side by side here. So for instance, we haven't modeled our future state and our current state, and we're looking at differences between them. At the moment, what we're interested in is what's currently happening. We're still at the point where we're trying to gather information to understand our organization. That has to be done first before we can plan on moving forward. Okay, next. What type of CMDB do you use to provide the master asset record that is consumed by Abacus?
So I think in this one, to be completely honest, at the moment, we haven't used the CMDB as our primary reference source. We've gone out in some other ways based on some other tools to capture that information. There is some work coming up to start to synchronize both Abacus and the CMDB, so everything is truly unified between them. But it maybe just shows that you don't have to, you don't have to have a fully populated, well-managed CMDB for everything to start with. This is a good way to collect some of that information and look to balance the two systems out.
So then our next question is, are there any methods to access, expose the Abacus graph database other than Visual Basic and the REST client?
Oh, I think I'm going to do the phone a friend thing and push that across to Avolution just to make sure that it is a correct answer. But certainly my understanding is the REST client is what we're using, and you obviously have a number of options of how you run that, whether it's in a platform like Workato, you can just run it in from Postman yourself, or if you have some other tools, I'm sure they'll be able to access it through that way. But I don't know, Peter or if it's Charlie that may be able to help on the call in terms of an answer for that one.
Yeah, I think that's what they were referring to, the REST API. Don't know if there's anything further that we can add.
I can comment on that in that the REST API can be accessed from anything that can call REST methods. So when we first got our hands on Abacus, I built a proof of concept in PowerShell that was uploading servers and applications and joining the relationships together. We actually didn't go down that path, but it's effectively any programming language that can call the REST API. The reason I used PowerShell is I used it in my previous job. So, you know, a typical one to use these days would be something like Python. But yeah, literally anything, I think.
I mean, what I can add, really just for perhaps the person who asked this question, but for anyone else who is looking for more information on, well, certainly our REST API and other options in Abacus. In fact, we did have a session on this yesterday, and that would certainly be downloadable for you to listen to after. Actually, I'm just also getting a note that perhaps one of our consultants is on the line as well, might be able to answer a little bit further.
Yes, hi, hopefully you can hear me. So yeah, it's Andrew, by the way, from Avolution. I just wanted to quickly add, I guess, for the comments around using something like BB. So there's a few .NET options as well. So using BB or C# to write scripts with Abacus to export or import data. But there are also, let's say, maybe more traditional formats. So, you know, connections to other tools, whether you're using XML formats, whether you have other EA tools that you want to integrate with as well. That's something we've done in the past. So the API isn't the only way. There's also these other integration options, let's say.
Cool. Good. Okay, Andrew, thank you for that. But as I was just saying, as I say, people that are looking for more information on various integration options, so we'll be passing on the details of the presentation from yesterday. Andrew, you can stay with us. So there's a couple more questions here. In terms of the global nature of your business, so this is very much a question for the guys at Mando. In terms of the global nature of your business and different privacy rules in different jurisdictions, do you run a truly single instance, or is it multiple instances where, e.g., data may be moved outside of a jurisdiction?
Okay, so this one is obviously it's an incredibly complex area that I'm not really qualified to answer in terms of data and jurisdictions and how it all works. I think I can just talk in terms of the Abacus instance. And if I go back to what I said a couple of questions ago, at the moment the data we're storing in Abacus is not kind of secret or has those sorts of implications because it's data about our IT systems. Rather than anything that would be subject to those type of controls. But it is obviously something we do consider every time we think about, can we add this data into that model?
Yeah, so we're a global company that's based in London, and all of our data centers, well, when we have things on premise, are in London. So we wouldn't be collecting any data in any jurisdictions from any of our jurisdictions that can't be stored in London. We have to be very careful about that being like a financial company. We're highly regulated. We do have data that can't be seen by other parts of our business. We could talk for hours about how that data is supposed to be segregated, which is why when we implemented our integration platform, we're currently at the moment only using it for information about IT systems. It's on my plate this quarter to figure out how to put those Chinese walls in place so that people can't see sort of sales clients from other businesses and things like that. But we don't have an answer for it yet.
Right. Okay. But I think that was a good response. So thank you for that, guys. Maybe back to sort of more familiar ground in terms of the technical side of the work that you're doing. Though this actually, I think, could be one that we could elaborate on a little bit as well from our side. The question is, what type of graph database is used for the product, and does it have an underlying API?
Yeah, by all means, the question is yours. It's your product, and this is, I think, one of the beauties for us in having a cloud software as a service. We don't need to necessarily be concerned about some of the underlying tech, but obviously, we've talked about the API in this session. It's very much there and accessible to be used.
Sure.
Yeah, I think Andrew's probably best suited to answer this one.
Yeah, cheers, James. So maybe just to expand on that a little bit further. So in theory, it's a proprietary XML graph database behind the scenes. And as Adam rightly said there, it doesn't affect anything too much, but what it does give us is a few advantages in terms of things like deployment. And there's no need to have databases installed, SQL databases installed to manage the data. It means we can control all the versioning within Abacus. I guess more importantly, it gives us that flexibility. So you would have seen, hopefully, during this presentation, there's so many different aspects of enterprise architecture that people want to develop over time. And we don't necessarily want to restrict you, and something else you would have seen from other discussions today and yesterday, to a specific framework, let's say. So having a graph database behind the scenes does give us the flexibility. So it's nothing, let's say, maybe more popular known like Neo4j or anything like that. It's our own custom database that we built that supports the product.
Cool. Good. Andrew, thank you for that. Actually, that really brings us to the end of the questions that we've had in. There was just a little bit of duplicate there amongst some of the others. So I think with that, as it's been a long Q&A session, I think we'll draw it to a close there. So thank you to all of you guys that have been involved in that. Adam, you were very much on the receiving end of the majority of those questions, so a special thanks, and of course for the presentation itself, which was fantastic. And James, obviously, Lindsay as well for your help with all that at the end there. Thank you very much. I say overall, it's been a great session. I think everyone's learned a lot from that. Maybe we'll have you back at the next one as well, guys. You can update us on this journey that Man is going on. Now, for everybody, thank you for your attendance in this session. We have about a 40-minute break now before our next presentation. That's actually being held with one of our US-based clients, a company called AFLEC, on EA Roadshows, how to communicate value company-wide. As I say, that will be beginning in about 40 minutes. Later, we have a further presentation from the UK. In fact, Andrew, who's been on this session, Andrew will be running that presentation on scenario analysis. And as we've mentioned on a few occasions, we've got a pub quiz at the very end of all that as well. So hopefully we're going to see you for those further sessions. But as I say, a further thank you for joining us this afternoon for this one. Many thanks.